This is chapter 50. I want to minister tonight a message entitled, Thy Trespass is Forgiven. And many years ago, about 1976, some of you might not have been born, but I was already in the military, and I came, as many of you know, I came from a small town, Southern California, just south of here. But even though it was really small, it had an abundance of hate. We grew up with hate. We grew up in a very violent time in El Centro, because there was always something going on. If we were not fighting the guys from a different neighborhood, we were fighting an entire different city there in Imperial Valley. And I remember hearing, I had a friend, Felix Villanueva, and we grew up in the neighborhood, went to high school together and what have you, and partied together. And there was a wedding going on that he went to. We had another friend, his name was Arthur, but his nickname was Lingy. That's what we called him in the streets. And he decided to get married to a girl from the city of Calexico. And so people were invited, obviously people from Calexico because she was from there, and people from El Centro. And so the problem is that we were in major war with Calexico. And we're constantly fighting with them every time we saw them anywhere. And so the wedding went on, and they had the reception at the Armory. And so there was a lot of tension in the air. And Felix went with his new bride. They had a small baby, an infant at the time. And he was there along with his brother-in-law and a good friend of mine as well, and his wife. And they decided to leave early because just the tension, and they didn't want to, have to get involved in anything, especially with having their wives there. And so they stepped out the doors of the Armory, and for whatever reason, there was a crowd of other young men that followed behind them, and the security guards were aware that something might happen. And so as soon as they saw a crowd of people going out, they immediately rushed the doors, closed them, and locked everybody inside. Felix and his wife Irene, and Gilbert and his wife Carmen, they were walking to their car, and these young men, they began to say things and began to get their attention. And they stopped, the four people stopped the two couples, and they turned around to see the young men that were saying these things. And as soon as they did that, one of those young men pulled out a gun. And as soon as the ladies saw the gun and Gilbert saw it, they began to run. Felix, he, for whatever reason, hesitated. But when he began to turn to run, that's when the man with the gun, the young man with the gun, shot him in the chest. Felix went down, and the young men that were with that young man surrounded Felix, and they broke both of his legs, they broke both his arms, they caved in his chest and his head, and just, did a number on him. They chased Gilbert, and they also put him in the hospital. And Irene went back, and she was holding Felix in her arms, and he died that night in her arms before the ambulance could ever come, and it was an unfortunate thing. And you know, there's a lot of things that happen in life, and you know, unexpected, and they have a way of changing you and I in our perspective and the way that you and I see things. Now I want to look with you at Joseph, because many of you are familiar with this portion of text. This is the latter part of what he's gone through, because he's not a teenager anymore. Years have passed. And it says these words in verse 16. And they sent a messenger unto Joseph, saying, Thy father did command before he died, saying, So shall ye say unto Joseph, Forgive, I pray thee, now the trespasses of thy brethren and their sin, for they did unto thee evil, and now we pray thee, forgive the trespasses of the servants of the God of thy father. And Joseph wept when they spake unto him. And his brethren also went and fell down before his face, and they said, Behold, we be thy servants. And Joseph said unto them, Fear not, for am I in the place of God? But as ye thought evil against me, but God meant it unto good, to bring to pass as it is this day, to save much people alive. Now therefore fear ye not, I will nourish you and your little ones. And he commanded them and spake kindly unto them. I'm going to talk to you for a moment about the unforgivable violations that happen in life. We're talking about some very deep wounds. And, you know, when I heard of Felix's death, I was moved, but I began to think about that, and I still to this day, I think about Irene and what she went through in that moment as she's holding her husband in her arms, and he is dying. I can only imagine the anguish. I can only imagine the torment and the sorrow, the tears flooding down her cheeks, and I can only imagine how that altered her life. I've never seen her since I left to go into the military. I wasn't able to return back to their funeral. And so, but I can only imagine what she went through. I also remember several years later, Gilbert, the young other man that was in that incident, he was killed in another gang fight and stabbed in the heart twice. And he also was there with his wife, and the battle just began to rage. He motioned to Carmen to go ahead, and he would follow after. But he turned, and that's when he was stabbed by another man by the name of Payaso. He died as well, and again, I can only imagine Carmen. I mean, these are good friends of mine and my wife, and we knew them. We were kids, and I grew up with these young men, and to hear of the death and the loss of life and how it ended, and Carmen herself was tragically killed, execution style, several years later. And to hear those things, and things of that nature have a way of affecting people around them, as well as those that it happens to. And for Joseph, here we find a young man with great promise. He has dreams and he's got vision. God is going to use his life. He's excited about life and excited about his future. Unfortunately, things happen. Unfortunately, things he never foresaw, it happened to him. It did take place. His brothers turn on him. We know the story. Many of us said they sent him and throw him in a pit. They wanted to kill him, but the Midianites find him. They sell him into slavery. The Ishmaelites do into the Midianites, and he finds himself in Egypt being sold as a slave. You know, in all of that, people try to make sense of life. You know, every one of us has been through some things. If you lived long enough, you've been offended. if you've lived long enough, you have been violated in some way, somehow. And the things that cross our minds in those moments is, how did this happen? How could this have taken place? And why? And all these different emotions and questions come all of a sudden to the surface. And so we react to that. And sometimes, we're wondering, can this really be real, what's happening? And I can't believe this is taken place. And we don't know what could have been going on through Joseph's mind, except for, we know what has gone on in our own minds when we have been hurt, when we have been violated. Things have happened to us. There are people today that are grown up that, you probably have heard the commercials or the advertisements, that if you've been molested, by, someone in the clergy, you can call this number and, we'll talk to you and things of that nature. So people do respond. Young men, or actually they're older men now, but when they were kids, they were violated by people that they trusted, people that they never would have believed would have ever done anything like that. Women are the same. We've all heard the stories of those men, in the Olympics, the man involved with the ladies, girls that were gymnasts, and how he violated them. And we can go on and on. You probably know your own stories that you have heard of people being hurt by not just simply others, but by loved ones, by brothers or sisters, or by uncles and aunts and fathers and what have you. And so these are hurts, these are violations, these are things that we just don't walk away from without being greatly affected. And here we are years later, many of us responding, many of us living life affected by what happened to you and I at an early age. And people wonder why we act and why we respond the way that we do. Because violations this evening in the natural demand retribution. They demand something happen to the violator. And so, years down the road, not that many, as I said, Felix died in 76, was killed. And 2 years later, Tony and Johnny Navarro are shooting pool at the QN in El Centro. A young man comes in. They recognize him. He's from Calexico. He was the brother of the individual that shot Felix. They recognize him. They know who he is. Because we're such a small community, we know each other, and we're familiar with where we frequent. But for whatever reason, he's there in El Centro, and he's went into the QN. Maybe he's going to shoot some pool, maybe grab a beer. I'm not sure. But Tony and Johnny remember, and they decide that there has to be retribution. We all know what that's like. We all hear of the killings and the rival gangs in LA and various different areas. Even here, perhaps, there is that to a great extent, where it's one rival gang takes advantage, and one member of another gang is killed. Then they have retribution. And so Johnny and Tony decide that that's the night that they're going to even the score, and they kill this man right there in the pool hall. And both of them are arrested and are sent to prison, 25 to life. Young men in their 20s. Life has affected them, and something that happened to someone else, nevertheless, it has affected them so much so that now their future has been sealed by someone else's actions, but they're responding to it. And many times that's how we are. We're that way in marriage. That we're the byproducts of life, every one of us, and the decisions and the choices that people make. And we enter into our marriages, and sometimes, the person that married us, they never knew who we really were until after the honeymoon, which a lot of times doesn't last long. It's kind of like the story, where Jacob, he's in Uncle Laban's house and he wants to marry Rachel. But he doesn't realize the custom of that time. That in order for Rachel to get married, her sister Leah has to get married first. And so he doesn't understand that or realize that, not really sure which one it was, but he enters into an agreement. He's going to work for his Uncle Laban, 7 years, and then after the 7 years, he's going to be able to marry Rachel. That's his understanding. And I'm not sure, did he enter this marriage blindfolded? But it tells us that he marries and that he enters into a relationship with the woman that he marries. And in the morning, he realizes it's not Rachel, it's Leah. That is a shocker, friend of mine. Okay, so I don't know whether he was under such a delusion that he didn't realize he had married the wrong woman, or he knew it. Nevertheless, that's how it is many times in marriage, that you don't really know the individual that you're married to until after it's all said and done. And then things begin to come up, and then they begin to respond, and they begin to do things, and they respond to you, you respond to them. And many times it's the response that we have learned from our parents, or we have learned because of what's happened to us. So, retribution because someone is to blame. When things like that happen, we're not necessarily able to see correctly. And, sometimes Christians can be nearsighted. That it's in these times that Christians are unable to see beyond the pain. They can't go any further. And they come into the kingdom, or things happen to them while they're Christians, and because of the pain, because of this unforgivable violation, they can't see anything else. We've all met people like that. Maybe you're sitting next to one. Someone that's been abused, someone that's been violated. And on the outward, they look pretty normal. They look like anyone else. They look like they're easygoing. They look like, they could be really great people. But it doesn't take long before when you begin to engage them, perhaps in conversation, you begin to know them. Maybe you function in ministry with them. You start coming to church. They start coming to church. You see them on a regular basis, and all of a sudden you begin to notice some things that in mere conversation, something is brought up, and all of a sudden, it has a way of agitating them. Maybe you say, hey, blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden they snap at you. All of a sudden they start saying things. You say, Pastor, all I said was good morning. All I said was hello. And they bit my head off. And a lot of times we say, they're probably just having a hard time. They got up on the wrong side of the bed, And that can be, but a lot of times it's more than that. It's the things that have happened to us. It's the violations. It's the people that abused us and have hurt us deeply. And so we're not going to allow that to happen. We're on the defense all the time. We've built these walls that I kind of spoke about, Sunday morning. Build these walls, that we have, and we won't allow anybody to come in close proximity to us. We have a hard time making real friends. Because we just can't let our guard down. And so we keep people at a distance. All our relationships are superficial. It's kind of like, you go to work and there you are, and there's maybe 20 people, maybe in the office or whatever it might be. And And so you know all of them. Hey, Chuck, hey, Susan, or whatever their names are. And you say hello to them. Maybe you exchange, a few words and chuckle a little bit. But they're not the people that you're going to invite over your house for a birthday party necessarily. They're not the individuals that you're going to really build a deep and lasting relationship. They're just simply superficial. And that's the way we can be in the kingdom. Is that we come and we sit around in the same room and sanctuary with people that we don't really know. We won't allow them to know us because we're not going to be hurt by anyone again. So you ever meet someone that have a hard time reading, and they need glasses? You ever see them? They'll adjust the book and they say, maybe you ought to get some glasses. I don't need glasses. I can see perfectly well. Right? That's how people are. We refuse to accept the fact that we've been affected by what's happened to us. That we're carrying a heavy load without fully understanding or realizing how it's affected us. And if anybody tries to maybe suggest that maybe we ought to just simply, hey, why don't you just let that person go? Oh, you don't know. You don't understand. Right? Like the man I talked about Sunday morning, something that happened 20 some odd years ago. And I'm just talking to him and I'm, but his voice it's elevating. And you could tell he is, upset. It happened all those years ago. It's time to move on. Oh, I'm sorry. I guess not. Right? See, for him, it's as if it just happened yesterday. Because that's how we are. That's how we recollect things. We can't see beyond the hurt. We can't see beyond the violations that have happened to us. And so whenever someone tries to suggest, and maybe even preaches about forgiveness, you know what? Immediately we're on the defense. Immediately we say, no, you're not talking to me. Immediately you don't understand what happened to me. And the problem is that unfortunately, we begin to keep with the wrong company. Who you surround yourself is very important. If you surround yourself with people that are bitter for some reason, if you are constantly in fellowship with individuals that have an axe to grind, then I won't be surprised if you begin to have an axe to grind, if you also become embittered for some reason or another, because birds of a feather flock together. You ever see backsliders? It's interesting that most of the time, backsliders will congregate together. It's like they built a little church of their own. You ever wonder why is that? Because they've all experienced similar things. Somewhere on down the line, they got the wires crossed. Somewhere on down the line, they didn't, they didn't accept what happened, or they didn't process what happened to them correctly. They didn't bring those things to God. They allowed things to fester. We can go on and on. And so they leave the church, and so they're not going to go down to the bar and hang out with strangers. No, they're going to gravitate to others that have an axe to grind. Because that's how we are, all of us. Is that we have a tendency to migrate towards individuals that are feeling the same way we are, that think the same way you and I think. And we need to be careful because that can be devastating. Genesis 37, verse 3 and 4. It says that Joseph's brothers are upset because their father made Joseph a very nice coat of many colors. And they're upset with this young man because he seems to be the favored, and yes, he was. And they couldn't handle it. And so the reason that they were able to come together and they were able to think of this plot to get rid of Joseph was because they'd been talking amongst each other. Yeah, you know, that stinking little rut, you know, he thinks he saw that. Yeah, it's true, man. I saw how he acted. Yeah, you know what? And that's right, man. And every time he puts on that jacket, he always walks around like he's all that in a bag of chips. They were all congregating together. And it's more than just the fact that they were all brothers. It's more than just the fact that they slept in the same house. We're talking about something that they all felt and something that they believed was violating them or, you know, hurting them in some fashion, some form. They hated Joseph. They couldn't speak nice to him. You know, when you got an axe to grind with someone, you have a hard time being nice to them, don't you? Can't even say hello. Good morning. You pass by them like they don't exist. They're on this side of the church, you're on that side of the church. If you're leaving the church and you see them walking toward the door, you head toward the bathroom. Because their very presence bothers you. It affects the way we serve God. It affects the way we are able to hear from God. We fail to realize that here we are, we're to love God with all of our heart, mind, soul, strength. But the reality is, if we can't love our own brother or sister, how can we really love God who we've never seen? We never connect the dots. And sometimes we wonder why we are stuck in a rut, why we haven't seen the growth personally that we would like to see. Why maybe growth has stopped. Maybe you got saved and God began to do great things in your life and you changed drastically, very quickly, but something happened and all of a sudden there's a stoppage. And you're not changing as quickly as you used to. And God's not doing great things like He once did in your life. That's what these men, they're stuck. Then here they are years later. They know what they did. They know that they violated their brother. They know that they lied to their dad. All of that is like it's fresh. They know they did this. They're afraid that Joseph's going to take advantage of them. He's going to have retribution. It's affected the way that they lived. Again, talking about people that flock together with the same axe to grind. You know, numbers embolden people in general. I've been in 2 riots back in the 60s as a young teenager. And there's something about a multitude of people that just emboldens you. It's kind of like there's just this juice going through your veins, and you'll do things that you would never do all by yourself. This is true in every facet of life, that numbers embolden people. And so that's why it was so easy for them to think about killing their brother. On their own, they would never have done this, but together, They felt the strength in numbers. Together, they could do this. And they did. They feel safe. And that's how many times it works. As I said, we migrate to people that feel exactly the way that we do. And, maybe we find ourselves in a fellowship and somebody's name is brought to the table and we're all feasting on them, killing their character. Because numbers embolden us. It's a part of our sinful nature. Genesis chapter 11, we find God coming down from heaven to see what man's doing. Not that he didn't know, but he comes anyway, and they're building that Tower of Babel, the story, and what God does, he confuses their language. And so what do? These people that can't communicate with each other, they immediately go out in search of someone that they can communicate with. That's what they do. And they're spread throughout the earth. Because it's human nature. It's a part of our fallen nature. But I want to talk to you about being set free. Because the tendency is to misunderstand forgiveness. That's the tendency. Sometimes people feel, well, if I forgive them, what if they take advantage of me again? If I forgive them, they might see that as weakness. And there are many other things that come to our mind because we misunderstand forgiveness. Every one of us does our best to protect ourselves. It's in our DNA, you might say. And we have a tendency to like scriptures like Matthew chapter 5, verse 38 and 39, which talk about an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Right? You ever find yourself sometimes just out of habit maybe? I remember, being a new convert, I was, I said this Sunday morning, I was very opinionated. And if someone said something, I always had to come back. I always had to say and have the last word. And I was very abrasive, so much so that I remember, that still to this day, I'm at a fellowship. It's me and my brother, and we're both kind of the same, very abrasive, and we're going to have the last word, and we're mockers and everything else. And so I remember the lady of the home, she's a good friend of ours, but she about had enough of our mess. And she said, you know what? You guys have to leave. You can't be here. Because you're destroying the beauty of our fellowship. And so you ever see, maybe there's a part of you, someone says something and maybe they're, what we would call smart aleck. And so you retaliate. You know what? Well, you retaliate in kind. That's a defensive mechanism that many of us have that we need to deal with if we're going to be the people God's called us to be. See, true forgiveness grows cross-grained with our natural instincts. That's why Joseph's brothers were so fearful. Because their dad's dead, and so now Joseph's going to hurt us. He's going to kill us. He's going to extract retribution. Because many times you and I, we project We project our fears. We project the things that are really in us on other people. I know not you, but me. I will project my fears. I will project my anger, my feelings on someone else. They're going to do this. They're going to respond this way. I just know it. I just got that gut feeling. Well, the reason I got that gut feeling is because that's the way I am. And so we respond in kind. And we can see it in children. At play, one of them gets hurt, or maybe a toy gets taken away from the other kid, immediately responds. Is going to do the same exact thing that happened to him or her to that other child. It's in our DNA. It's a part of us, our fallen nature, to protect ourselves, to extract revenge if we feel someone has hurt us. And so the very words, Jesus, the Beatitudes, he said, this is the way the world is. This is the way they react. But I want you to be different. That's what the Beatitudes are all about. He's challenging you and I in our attitude, right? Beatitudes, our attitude. Okay. The world responds this way, but I want you to be different. If they, hit you, well, turn the other cheek. If they want your coat, give them that and give them another one. Be different. That's what salvation is all about, isn't it? It's more than just you and I. We're not doing drugs anymore. We're not drinking beer, carousing the streets. We're not immoral, all these different things. It's more than that. It's changing of our mind and changing of our attitudes. And we're different people. And instead of harboring bitterness and anger and resentment, we are becoming forgiving people. I know you wanted to hurt me, but you know what? Don't sweat it. I forgive you. Those are very powerful words. And it takes great courage to say those words to someone that has hurt you. See, you and I have to find ourselves in all of this. Who am I? Who am I? A man filled with hatred, like I was when I first got saved. A man filled with bitterness and anger and prejudices. Is that still me? You have to find yourself. You have to, who am I? Have I changed? Am I really different from who I was? And maybe I have been a victim. Maybe someone did take advantage of me. Maybe someone did hurt me very badly. But here, years have gone down the road. Am I still a victim? Am I still the one that has been violated? Or have I somehow matured? Have I somehow dealt properly with the issues? Am I a different individual? That's what we have to ask ourselves. Because it's important to us and it's important to God. Joseph says in verse 19, am I in the place of God? See, my two friends, Tony and Johnny Navarro, they put themselves in the place of God to judge this man for the sins that his brother committed. And what Joseph is saying, listen, I'm not going to judge you. God's going to take care of everything. Everything is in the hands of God. And if he chooses to judge you, then that so be it. If he chooses to let you go because you've repented, whatever it might be, you know what? That's between you and God. It's not between me and you and God. That's not there anymore. And that's what Joseph is conveying to his brothers. Am I in the place of God? See, the violation brought separation, because that's what violation does. It brings separation. You know, as I'm talking to this man over the phone, I can sense it, you know. At one time we were close. At one time we were almost like brothers. But see, what's happened to him has brought separation. And the devil loves to separate you and I. He is in the mode of conquer by division. Divide and conquer. And he has you and I, rub up against each other, and we do things, and somehow, there are things that I do that I know are probably offensive to somebody else. Do I do them purposely? No, it's just who I am. Could I be different? Yes. Should I change? Obviously. Am I willing to? Yes. But I'm not perfect, and neither are you. And we're going to hurt each other along this journey called life. And if we're going to survive and we're going to grow in God, then we're going to be able to take those hurts and take those violations and basically bring them under the blood of Christ and allow God to be the judge, and you and I simply be like our Father in heaven, who simply forgives those that come and ask for forgiveness. Because I don't know about you, but the older I get, the weaker I am physically. There was a time where I was pretty strong. I worked in the medical field, and I worked sometimes in the convalescent home here and on Rimrock. At the convalescent home, I worked there. And so sometimes those old folks are pretty heavy, and they can't move around. And so I'd go in there and help those girls, and I'd pick them up and I'd set them in their chairs and what have you, because I had a good strong back. I was young. But I can't do that anymore. That's the reality. And the longer that you and I are saved, we need to realize that it becomes difficult to serve God when you're carrying these heavy burdens. Because there are times, that when someone has hurt you and violated you, they don't even know. I'm talking to this man on the phone, and he's saying, yeah, this. And I said, I never did that. Who told you I did that? Here he's been carrying for all these years this heavy load, things that he believes that I did or that I said, things that happened to him. He's carrying this massive load on his back when he never had to. But it's weighing him down. I could sense it. I could feel it from his voice. It has weighed him down, and his relationship with God is not what it should have been or what it could be. We have to leave everything in the hands of God tonight. Verse 20, he says, you thought and you planned evil against me, and you intended to harm me. But God meant it for good. He used those plans for my good. It's in those times of pain and violation that God is wanting to stretch you and I. See, it's not possible for you and I to reach the lost without fully understanding what many of them are going through. And so we go through our own heartaches. And God allows things to happen to us so that we can process life correctly and we can reach for the sinner that is hurting, and not be judgmental and not be cold, but in loving care and concern, we can say, I know what you're talking about. I relate with your pain. I know exactly where you are because I was there. And because I was there and I'm not there, I can help you. It's a picture of someone that has, gone down with the ship, and there's people that are out there floating, trying to survive, and then there's a few that are on these boats, and they're coming and they are rescuing the people that are in the water. That's a picture of what we're involved in. See, but I can't help anybody if I've never been through anything. If I've always shielded my life, if I've been unforgiving and uncaring and hateful and what have you, if I've been all those things, there's no way that I can understand. There's no way that I can feel what the hurting feel. There's no way that I can reach them. Because I may say all the right words, but it's like a sounding brass. It just doesn't connect. So God allows things to happen to us, not to destroy us, not to damage you and I. But He knows that there's a world out there that is hurting. And if we're going to reach them, it's because we've overcome our hurts and our pain. Let's bow our heads. Heads are bowed, eyes are closed.